Tanshi, Monica Fisher, Dishnukashun, Invermere Nowikin. Hello, my name is Monica Fisher, and I live in Invermere. That was the language of the Métis people, Michif, and it is something that I'm learning, but very proud to share. I live on the traditional territory of the Ktunaxa and the Secwepemc people. I'm very proud to call this place my home and being a visitor to this land and the visitors of the Métis people of British Columbia. I'm really, really proud about my position as president for Columbia Valley Métis Chartered Community. So I am the daughter of Deborah Fisher, and my father is Ken Fisher. My mom, Deb, was born and raised in Invermere as well. She was born in Pine Logs, which at that time was a hospital, and is now a cultural center and restaurant. My father, Ken Fisher, was born in Creston, and I don't really have any fun information about that, but he was born in Creston and ate lots of cherries. He moved here, I believe, when he was 6 years old. My mother's parents are Evelyn Barassa. Her father was James Lynn McGillivray, but goes by Streak McGillivray. He had an excavating company. And my grandmother, Evelyn, we call her Nanny, she was a nurse. So she was actually working at Pine Logs and then worked at the hospital in Invermere.
Who am I? I'm Evelyn McGillivray. I'm Métis and have lived in Invermere since 1954. If you've known Monica, you won't forget her. She was a beautiful child, good, easygoing. Monica is very courageous, intelligent, caring, and beautiful. Monica did her thing. You never knew what she was going to do. She could be out in the trampoline jumping around in the nude. And she respects people and accepts people as who they are. There's always good in everybody. No, just observing her with her students, but she's quite happy with them and enjoying every minute of it, and the kids love her. We have no secrets. We talk. I've told her things I haven't told anybody else. And she comes to visit me weekly, and I can think about things and talk to her. If I'm ill, she looks after me. I mean, I look forward to her visits, and we are very, very close.
And my dad's parents are Bernice Todd. She was a stay-at-home mom and a caretaker of her family. My grandfather, Murray Fisher, was born in Cranbrook. He was a grocer, so he started in Creston and moved to Invermere, and him and his business partners built the grocery store and then built where the Red Apple is in Invermere. So that was their building. And then he sold, and my uncle and family have stayed in that business until they've all retired. We have a long history in the Columbia Valley, and we're always happy to be able to call this place our home, to be able to live and play here. I remember my childhood being filled with adventure and joy, and our pool in our backyard and beautiful petunias just absolutely everywhere. My mom was an incredible, or is an incredible gardener.
Tansi, my name is Deborah Fisher, and was born and raised in Invermere. I am the daughter of Streak and Evelyn McGillivray. I'm the very proud mother of Monica Fisher. Monica was my second child, my middle child, and I called her my little boy without a handle because from the moment she was born, she was a go-getter, and she didn't listen very well. Many times she kind of just had a mind of her own. And I think one of the first times that I saw her where she was super fiercely independent, she was just learning how to crawl up things, and she crawled up a chair, up onto the table, and we had a sugar bowl that was from a restaurant where you know, with a hole in the middle. And I told her not to put her finger in there, that it would get stuck, but she insisted that, and she was licking her finger and she was getting the sugar out. And sure enough, she stuck her finger in too far and it got stuck. And I've got a really good picture of her crying because she was pretty frustrated because she couldn't get her finger out. Monica was born with a very deep voice. and her cousin was in the crib with her. I was babysitting them. And her cousin was older than her, and so she got out of the crib and came down the hallway, and the next thing I hear is this huge thump, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, my kid's hurt herself. And so I went flying into the bedroom, and there she was sitting on the floor, and in her deep, deep voice, she was like, because she was so proud of herself for getting out of the crib. And that was kind of like the way it was going to be for the rest of her life. So she's pretty independent, adventurous.
I remember just always being outside and knowing I would be getting into trouble, but still doing it anyways. And then like trying to figure out ways of getting out of trouble or to hide my tracks. I actually remember that. We used to catch snakes. We had a snake club, and we'd ride our BMXs up to the old dump and lift old, big, long, like it was the old dump. There was cement everywhere, and it was like snake pits. And me and the boys would go and lift this cement and pick up all the snakes we could, and then take it to our friend's place for the day, and then we'd release them the next day when we got our next allotment. And I just remember, like, I was thankful and lucky enough that we have the water here and the mountains, the freedom to roam. And I think growing up in the 80s and 90s in the valley, it was still a bit of a secret. And the areas that are now consumed with houses and people were our playground. And so I just remember it being really close-knit and happy. Apart from the happiness of my childhood and the joy that I remember, there was obviously some hardships. When I was 18 months old, I came down with spinal meningitis. And although I was 18 months old, I don't really remember much. But looking at the photos with me with no hair and needles in my head and being really puffy, and kind of the photos of looks of fear on my family, ooh, I'll get emotional.
When Monica was 18 months old, she contracted spinal meningitis, and we were very close to losing her.
You know, I thankfully triumphed, and I hear stories that I didn't talk before, and the first thing I said was, I want apple juice, and my mom was excited because she knew I didn't have brain damage then, because that's what the doctors told her I would have. And thankfully, the only thing that we know is that I have learning disabilities, which are what they are. And I also have ADHD. I was actually dual diagnosed with learning disabilities and ADHD.
It was almost like Monica got a second chance at life, and she knew it. From there on, she was hell on wheels.
I was a happy kid outside of school, but in school it was terrible. I think because of my learning disabilities and ADHD, I really struggled with learning, focus, sitting still, being quiet, and being told to be quiet or that I couldn't do it. Or because of my learning disability, thinking that I couldn't do it because I couldn't complete basic things that I could compare myself with. And I think probably in grade 4 was the first time I felt it. And I felt different, and I felt stupid, and I felt like I couldn't do things. So like school, elementary, primary and secondary, I really struggled. The emotions that you get when you feel like you aren't going to be successful or can't do something, the negative self-talk comes in. The I'm stupid, or I can't do it, or don't bother trying because you won't achieve it, or you're going to look stupid in front of your friends, are all things that always went through my mind. And I still, even as an adult now, I think I work really hard at maintaining a positive outlook and also talking myself into doing and trying things that I am able. I think in that experience and now working as an Indigenous education support worker at the high school level as a secondary at a secondary level really helps both connect me and understand what many of our children are going through, that not one recipe fits every student. I mean, I'm very open and I'm very honest with my learning disabilities and ADHD, and I think that really helps first connect me to the students. As well, they are able to be more vulnerable to me so that we can work through strategies, work through positive affirmations, and be able to show them also that even though you have a learning disability or ADHD or any other disability, that we all have our strengths and that we all have passions and we all have the ability to be really successful in life. And that's, I think, part of my job in the work I do is showing that we're all different. We can all be very successful. But I think a lot of that comes down to the choices that we make and how we take the hard stuff on. I think, if we're always thinking that we're stupid and we don't work through that or get the counseling that we need or the learning strategies that we need and try and take the world on our shoulders, it's really hard.
Well, Monica was always very compassionate. She was always also very caring about other people, particularly any kids or anybody that was being picked on at school. She had no problem sticking up for them.
I helped all my friends and I was friends with everyone. I wasn't in a clique or a group necessarily, but I had a lot of good acquaintances, and people have always seemed to gravitate to me to talk about their struggles and their problems. And I think part of that is because I am vulnerable. Going through those experiences with depression, with learning disabilities, with ADHD, with really just struggling in school has helped shape my future and shape the work that I do. I look at my ADHD as a superpower. So I finished high school and my parents had a rule. I had no idea what I wanted to do or be. University and college terrified me, and I genuinely never thought that I would ever go. And so their rule was, if you're not going to go to school, you have to travel. I was kind of forced to save up my money and either find a friend to go with or go on my own. And I remember my friends saying that they kind of put a bet against me of how long I would actually last by myself. They didn't think I was going to make it the year, and so it was a big, well, watch me, I'm going to last a year. So I saved up my money and I went to Australia first. I was a nanny for 2 boys with disabilities, and I worked at SeaWorld at the same time. I'm really grateful that I went by myself because it gave me the opportunity to be comfortable in my own skin. When you're left in silence, and at that time no technology apart from your Discman. I think I went through like 3 Fleetwood Mac CDs on that trip. My time in Australia ended after almost a year. I went to New Zealand, and then I also went to Fiji, and then I went to England and Scotland. And I ran out of money so fast. And so I decided that I would come back to Canada. I wanted to move to Calgary to try and get a job at WestJet so that I could stop going in debt from traveling and maybe get paid to travel. But I didn't get the job at WestJet. It was the first time in my life that I didn't get the job I applied for. I was absolutely heartbroken. So I called one of the support people that I kept in touch with after high school. She worked at the high school when I was there, and so I went for tea and she sat me down and she just said, well, there's obviously a reason for it. So you're gonna sit in front of this computer and here's my credit card and you're applying to school. I was like, absolutely not, I won't do it. I'm not gonna get in. So she's like, no, there's no harm in trying. So I applied to Mount Royal, and lo and behold, I got in. During the time of my application to school, not knowing what I wanted to apply for, I just went in as a general student. But during that time, I was, working at a pub, saving up my money, trying to figure out who I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. When I was working in the pub, there was a gentleman named Sparky and his friend Russ, who squatted or rough slept. And that really just means that they were sleeping in a house or sleeping outside. And they would come in for tea and coffee and a warm-up or a soda water. And I just befriended them. They loved karaoke night, which was hilarious. But Sparky and I just clicked. He was just a really kind man. He was older. I think he at that time was probably 51 or 52 and looked older than that, just because of the rough life he had. He was an alcoholic. He was not a drug addict, but he literally his entire life since he was, I think, 16 was on the streets, and primarily in Banff and in Calgary. And he was sleeping in this house, and so I actually had to walk past that house every night from work. So I would always bring my leftover food and leave it on the step. And he loved to read. He actually, even while homeless, was able to obtain from U of C a bachelor's in history, which he was super proud of. But he loved reading books, and there was always a lawn chair outside the street lamp outside the house where he would sit all hours of the night and read these books. So I would leave, flashlights and food and warm clothes, and then every once in a while I'd check on them if I hadn't seen them. And I really enjoyed the process. And one night, actually, because it was going into winter, Russ and Sparky were saving up money so they could try and find a place to rent, so they didn't freeze to death. And somebody robbed them. Somebody went into the house and robbed them and beat them up. And Sparky, unfortunately, was hurt, but he was feeling really low and did attempt suicide after that. Thankfully, Sparky wasn't successful in his suicide, and he, as I was going to the house, the ambulance attendants were wheeling him into the ambulance to go get him checked out and make sure he was okay. And the ambulance attendants looked at me and looked at them and looked at me and were like, "How do you know these guys?" And I just was just standing there, and Sparky off the stretcher is like, "She's taken us under her wing. She's Mother Monica." And from there, it was just a incredible friendship and connection with this man who was just caring and kind and lovely and grossly misunderstood, and just really suffered from a lot of trauma throughout his life. I got a Mother's Day card every year. They would bring me cards. And Russ ended up getting a job and getting off the streets, which is the best case scenario. And Sparky and I just continued to be friends, and I really wanted him off the streets, and he wanted off the streets. So I was able to help him. We were able to get him in a low-income seniors housing development. Once he got into the seniors development, housing development, he was happy and safe, and that was a whole other teaching opportunity. But I did that all because he was my friend, not because of any payment or anything in return. But it made me feel so good, and to see somebody who's been homeless their whole life start going to counseling, getting supports, having some income, and have a home, I really enjoyed the process, and that is what made me decide to go from kind of just a general studies into social work. So I enrolled after my year of general studies. I was accepted into Mount Royal University to do a dual diploma, one in social work, one in disability studies, and I did that at the same time. I finished school, moved on, and was able to obtain a position at the local high school where I am at now. It's so funny when I think of this reflection of the fact that I walk by my high school grad photo every day. Now I get to be there, and I get to be working in the space. I get to be, and the goal of my job is to be the person that I needed. And that's really what's inspired me to do this position as an Indigenous education support worker. I went in having really no idea what that job entailed. I obviously had my mother, who was the ABED worker, that's the short form.
And I know in Monica's future with the students that she's working with, how much she cares about them and loves about them, and it'll come back tenfold. You never know what your impact is on somebody. Sometimes it's a student you never even worked with that comes back to you and tells you that you made a difference.
To be able to work with our students, currently I have 117 students that identify as Indigenous, which works out to about 20% of the population of the school. And it's steady growing numbers, and I think those steady growing numbers are a mixture of things. With Truth and Reconciliation, there is more awareness and acknowledgement. And instead of being Indigenous and filled with shame or trying to actually protect your family by not acknowledging, it is something that we are working towards in gaining pride. And that mixes into my two different jobs as, Indigenous education support worker, but also as the president for Columbia Valley Métis. I don't ever have a day at school that is the same. Every day is different. Every problem is different. And the job that we're doing right now in this current time, which is different from when my mom did it. My mom did some absolutely incredible work, and I can't imagine the difficulties that she went through in the work, and the work that we're doing now in Truth and Reconciliation, and the fact that Canada as a whole has acknowledged it, changes the dialogue a little bit and changes the work that we do. And there's that pressure of ensuring that our kids are getting what they need, but also educating the greater public about Truth and Reconciliation, about Indigenous people, who Indigenous people are, and also who we as Indigenous people are. Because as much as truth finding is within the greater population, truth finding is also happening with us as Indigenous people, because colonization was so successful. Colonization was so successful in taking away language and culture and traditions, breaking up family networks, and instilling a sense of fear. And I don't like to focus on the shame so much, because I hear often people talking about that their families never acknowledged being Indigenous, not because of shame necessarily, but because they wanted to protect their family. And now we have more and more people acknowledging their ancestry because it's safe, because our schools are becoming a safer place, because Canada as a whole is becoming a safer place. And it's an exciting time because we get to, as Indigenous workers, see the changes and see the progress and see the successes of our students. I love when I have a non-Indigenous kid say, I wish I was Indigenous. I love when our Indigenous kids are proud of being Indigenous. I'm excited when their parents are saying we're doing a good job because they're now getting forced to get their Métis cards or get their status cards. And that shows a lot of progress within us, within our group of Indigenous people. We've got the Ktunaxa and the Secwepemc and the Métis here. And there's a lot of misconceptions in regards to what Indigenous means or Aboriginal. And I take pride in being able to not only teach non-Indigenous people, but also Indigenous people, because there's a lot of misconceptions of who the Indigenous people are in Canada, that there are 3 groups of Indigenous people in Canada. That there is our First Nations. So our First Nations being the Ktunaxa, being the Secwepemc people, being the Blackfoot or the Piikani or the Cree. Those are First Nations. Those are the people that were here before us and whose traditional territory we live on and get to play on and work on and prosper from. Hearing land acknowledgements at meetings or at events or any kind of activity that's happening is so important for all of us as Canadians to identify that it is our place as Canadian citizens to acknowledge whose traditional territory we prosper from, whose traditional territory we've taken away. And I think that that's important, and I love being able to go to meetings and hear the land acknowledgement and hear people trying to learn the local language, even if it's just a hello. I take so much pride in that, and I think that that's That's the work that we've done. That's the work that my mom has done. That's the work that our nations have done. And I can't wait to see where we go. And I'm gonna get emotional because I'm so proud. And I see that sense of pride not only within our school, within our community. I see it, with our education system is doing a great job. And there's a lot of work that needs to get done both in our schools and in our greater communities. But it is happening and I'm seeing it, and that makes me really excited. And that is part of the reason I think also in taking my position with Columbia Valley Métis. Thankfully, I was elected as president for the Columbia Valley Métis, which I'm really, really proud about.
What is the
Columbia Valley Métis? My mother, actually Deborah Fisher, founded Columbia Valley Métis Chartered Community. It is our Métis community. We aren't land-based. This isn't our traditional homeland. And so we have an office up at the Chamber of Commerce where we get to support our citizens. We have Métis Mondays, which is open to everybody. And the whole idea of that, we've got people playing crib, we have food, we learn Indigenous artwork and Métis specific artwork. And that is the work that I do, and that's the work I live and breathe, because so many ways to be involved and to give back. Feel free to reach out to one of us on our district websites. Just learn more. That's your duty. That's your job as Canadian citizens. I wouldn't be able to do any of the work that I do without the love and support of my husband, Bert Beaudry. I wouldn't be able to do this either without the sacrifices of my kids. Community in our valley is incredible, and there's so much opportunity and so many ways to be involved and to give back, and I just hope more people do it in a good way. So yeah, thanks for watching.